Welcome, everyone, to this special Friday edition of Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. On today's show, we've got a semifinal to go over. Jannik Sinner straight sets over Novak Djokovic to advance to his first Roland Garros final and create the first ever Sinner versus Alcaraz major final. I don't want to say long overdue because, come on, I mean, there's, in the grand scheme of things, they're really young. But about time, right? About time we get Sinner and Alcaraz in a slam final. You knew it was only a matter of time before it was going to happen. So we'll preview that. But let's start with Sinner over Djokovic in a very competitive straight sets. Final scoreline 6-4, 7-5, 7-6. Sinner has now won 5 out of his last 6 matches with Novak. So let's start there. It's needless to say that there are a lot of bad signs for Djokovic in this head-to-head. And it's not just the win-loss results. If you dive deeper, particularly into their most recent matchups that have come post-2023, when Novak was still really, he had just had an incredible season where he was the best player in the world. After that point, they've played 3 times since. And between the Australian Open semifinal at the start of last year and the Shanghai final last fall, Djokovic had played 6 sets in a row without generating a single break point against the serve of Jannik Sinner. When it was all said and done after this Roland Garros semifinal, Novak had broken Jannik once, which means Novak has broken once in the last 9 sets against the Italian. Sinner served 51% first serves in this match. This match was on clay. It was at night. The fact that Novak could only produce 1 break, again, doesn't bode all that well. Why has this matchup been a buzzsaw for Djokovic? I think Sinner has confounded Djokovic the same way Djokovic has confounded everybody else for the better part of the last 15 years. Specifically, as Djokovic has developed, continuously developed his skills and become as polished and well-rounded a tennis player as you can possibly become. It's created a situation where opponents, I think, look at Djokovic and think, can we game plan against this? What's the weakness we're trying to exploit? What's the path of least resistance? You throw up your arms, you don't even know. Meanwhile, whatever your weakness is, Djokovic can do whatever it takes to find it and to take advantage of it, no matter what it is. And I think now it kind of goes the other way. Novak looks at Sinner. I think everybody looks at Sinner. And there has to be a little bit of confusion right now. Okay, how do we go about this tactically? You kind of got to go skill for skill, shot for shot, athlete for athlete. And that's what Novak hasn't been able to do in their last few meetings. And it's an interesting and meaningful development in Djokovic's career because I think for him, if he doesn't feel like his body can facilitate beating Jannik Sinner, then it might send him into retirement. It might signal the end for him. That's what the stakes are, right? The stakes for Djokovic, in a way, couldn't be lower. He's accomplished everything there is to accomplish. There are no super meaningful goals for Djokovic to strive for, other than, running up the count, right? We've gone over this. So in that way, the stakes are exceptionally low. In another way, I'm watching this match and I'm thinking the stakes are life or death potentially for Djokovic's tennis career, because as soon as he decides, I can't be competitive anymore, he probably decides that it's not worth it to play anymore. Those two things probably happen at the same time. And Sinner, for that reason, I think Sinner running up the count in this head-to-head recently does mean something. And Djokovic walks off the court and takes a moment, puts his bag down, touches the clay, acknowledges the crowd, clearly takes it in a way that signals, and Novak talked about it after the match, he was trying to soak it in and appreciate that moment because he doesn't know if it's going to come again. Let's take a quick break and then talk about the match.
Roland Garros coverage on Monday Match Analysis is brought to you by Go Sport. It's a family-owned company that specializes in just tennis bags, so they do it better. It stands up all on its own, which is one of my favorite parts. It's got more pockets than you could possibly ever need, and a black design that's sleek and matches all tennis racket brands. This compartment up here is special. It's ventilated, designed specifically for shoes and clothes. Check out gosport.com. That's Go, G-E-A-U, and use the code GIL10 for 10% off your order. It's my favorite bag that I've ever owned. Support them because they support us.
Link is in the description. Let's talk some X's and O's. So first thing that stands out right away is that Djokovic is once again breaking up the baseline rallies with a heavy dosage of drop shots, mostly on the backhand side, some on the forehand. But it takes on a totally different meaning against Sinner, predictably, because no longer is it exploiting an opponent who willingly gives up and cedes a lot of ground in front of him with court position and gets a little bit predictable when he gets up to the drop shot, doesn't have the best hand skills, doesn't enjoy the improvisation and the cat and mouse of it all. It's no longer exploiting that. It's now shying away from the baseline battle and displaying a lack of confidence in your ability to win ground stroke battles straight up. In some cases, it's potentially just a lack of rally tolerance, feeling like you have to save your legs. That's how it read to me, especially because these drop shots were not coming from inside the baseline or from prime attacking positions. The best defense against a drop shot is a quality ball. Always. You hit a good deep trade, you are going to take away the drop shot and the availability of that shot, the feasibility of that shot. And that's what Sinner was doing. Novak was going to the drop shot from too far back. The ball hangs in the air for too long. Sinner, is usually well positioned to get up to that drop shot. And he wasn't only getting there, he's getting there with the ball high enough to actually drive the backhand. And that's key because I don't think Novak hit that many drop shot winners against Zverev. He just kept winning every single point. But a lot of them weren't winners. The difference, though, is the height at which the drop shot is retrieved, which is especially massive when you're that close to the net. Because when Sinner can take the ball at the level of the tape or above, he can keep two hands on the racket and drive the ball, forehand or backhand. As soon as that ball drops below the knees, now, unless you have some pretty special abilities, and Medvedev is really good at driving the ball no matter what, you basically have to slice as soon as the ball gets below your knees. Sinner was mixing it up well. Novak missed 6 drop shots in this match. Sinner missed none, so it contributed to the consistency gap. And Novak didn't hit a drop shot winner until 4-all in the third set. So it was definitely just an early sign that there was some insecurity from Djokovic. And predictably, I would say, because of what Jannik does, his quality of shot, his court positioning, his clear-headedness when he gets up to the ball, and I'm sure preparing for this and talking about, okay, what are we going to do when we get up to Djokovic's drop shots because we know they're coming. All of these things combined to create an environment where Djokovic's drop shot was completely neutralized after it was the biggest key to his win in the quarterfinal. Although Novak did put that play away for the most part after the first set. Novak had no choice but to engage Sinner in that baseline slugfest. And Sinner won that baseline slugfest more often than not. Why? Because he accesses power easier than Novak, and Djokovic can't absorb those big heavyweight punches consistently like he used to. It just didn't look like Novak was quite fast enough to make his defense a real factor. Did he turn some points around? Yeah. Usually because of his anticipation. Especially on Sinner's inside-out forehand, it felt like Novak was just sitting there waiting for that a couple of times. But usually, when Djokovic was able to flash the defense, it's because he read the shot and he left early. It was not a lot of, raw speed and end range excellence from Djokovic in this match. And I think it sometimes would have looked like Novak was doing a great job defending because he was still committed to playing hard defense. He still is very flexible and slides well, and when he stretches out and slices the ball, he's able to put it back in the court from extreme positions and all that. But I think that there are balls in which Djokovic is going to the desperation slice defense, where in the past, when he was just a little quicker, he would have been able to drive the ball. And I think there were winners that Sinner hit that when Novak was faster, it would have been desperation slice defense. The technique is there. The commitment is there. The racket skills are there defensively. The anticipation is really good. For all those reasons, Djokovic is still an way above average defender on the tour. But he's facing somebody with one of the most overwhelming packages of ground stroke artillery on the tour. And that just made Novak look a little slow out there. This might have been the first big match, where Djokovic's legs looked very 38. Now, Wimbledon versus Alcaraz, that final last year, I felt the same way. I felt that Djokovic's court coverage couldn't match up with Alcaraz's offensive output, but you had that meniscus surgery a month prior, which really created an easy explanation for that, and you could brush it off because of that. In this case, you don't have that, but I was seeing the same thing. When Sinner had a short ball, unless Novak pulled something out of his behind with anticipation, there wasn't much coming back. And when, in Novak's career, have you seen his court coverage look outmatched by somebody's ground game? Like, basically never. So Novak's counter to this, because he felt what was happening, he basically tried to go Turin 2023 final and just play in the red, especially off the forehand. Max out the pace, flatten out the forehand. He had stretches, especially in the second set, where the forehand did go God mode. It's really fun to watch Djokovic play like this because you start to realize that he's on his average rally ball, even on his average attack, he's holding back a little bit. He's not going all out, which is true for a lot of pros when you talk to them. But the fun part is when he feels like he actually does need to lash the ball with everything he's got, he's able to do it pretty well and come up with some magic. But this is outdoor clay. Turin is indoors, slickest court on the circuit. It's like an ice skating rink, to use the words of Jim Courier. And it's harder. So what that means is it's both harder to be consistent and it's not as rewarding when you're able to land those blows. And then I think another big difference between this match and that Turin final that Djokovic won in straights, and I thought he was just stunning in that match, is Novak's serve wasn't always putting him in a position to attack against Sinner's return. Jannik did a good job of finding some neutralizing returns deep down the middle to engage himself in these baseline rallies and not let Djokovic get that first strike. That wasn't happening as much in Turin, but that kind of takes away Novak's ability to just take full control off of a big +1 forehand. But the biggest thing here is that if you're going to play in the red, you're going to miss more, especially in best out of 5, especially outdoors. Djokovic lost the unforced error count 53-36. He had to go higher on risk profile to protect his legs because he knew that once Sinner took control of points, Novak wasn't coming back. He had to do this by necessity. He over 50 unforced errors in a 3-set match. That's rare for Novak. It was basically the better of two evils because dialing back and making more balls wasn't going to work. Let's do a notebook dump on this match. Quick thoughts, not as developed. Some of them will be somewhat rapid fire. Let's start with the conditions. Roof was closed for the first semifinal, Alcaraz Musetti. And the explanation for that will be they felt in the forecast there was a threat of rain, and they didn't want to risk the first semifinal being interrupted and potentially bleeding into the window of the second semifinal, particularly because that involves a transition period inside Chatrier. They got to get the fans out, new fans in, because it's a separate ticket. That will be the explanation. They probably could have left the roof open because by most accounts it did not rain. But they do open the roof for Djokovic, Sinner. And at first I was thinking, well, Sinner was a great player indoors before he was a great player everywhere else. Djokovic has been the best indoor player easily in the last 10 years. So if the roof is closed, they're both going to be like, great. If the roof is open, okay, that's kind of what you expect anyway. I thought, all right, doesn't really matter much. As soon as I saw how windy it was once the roof was open, that's when I started thinking, okay, this is good for Jannik. Novak would rather the still conditions where his offense can get a little boost, which is really what he needs. I don't think he needs his defense. I don't think it matters as much if his defense gets a boost because I don't think he's winning with defense against Sinner in any conditions. So that's my take on it. I think the roof open and the wind helped Sinner because it made it more difficult for Djokovic to play his low margin attacking. On the movement thing, I didn't want to make this a part of my main argument when talking about the movement, but I want to get it in here. There's a real question of if Novak was 100% because there was stretching, there was treatment from the physio, and it's not as if we haven't seen Novak move well this year. After recovering from the injury in the quarterfinal at the Australian Open against Alcaraz, Novak's court coverage was just jaw-droppingly good. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I thought Miami this year, that run to the final, he looked speedy to me around the court. He didn't face anybody on Jannik Sinner's level, but he looked speedy. So we've had those flashes, and it goes back to what we talked about coming into the tournament. The reason why I was so weary, and in hindsight, I overreacted a little bit. But the reason I was so weary of Novak coming into this week was because he was going to have to play tennis for 3 weeks straight. And at 38 years old, I just don't think that is ideal. So the question is, would Djokovic have been fresher? Would he have been moving better? Had he not had to play Geneva? Had he had his traditional lead up to Roland Garros where he plays Rome and he gets to rest the week before? I don't know that for sure, but it's certainly possible based on what we saw. Sinner wins a third set tiebreak. Sinner in tiebreaks since the start of 2024, 31-9. 78% win percentage. That is simply off the charts. I want to shout out another example of Jannik Sinner's mental unflappability. Second set, 5-4. Serving for a 2-0 lead. He gets broken. Ends a run of 45 consecutive service holds for Sinner against Djokovic. First time he'd lost serve at the tournament since the first round against Rinderknecht. And in this particular game, he went 1 out of 6 on first serves made. He breaks Djokovic in the next game. He was so disappointed in himself. He was so discouraged by that poor effort at 5-4 that he just broke Novak in the next game. Just, to me, that's classic Sinner, unfazed by what's happening on the scoreboard and what's happening around him. Just almost robotic in how consistent his output is. Next item. This one's kind of random, but hey, something I observed. I don't think I've ever seen Novak use the runaround return on the ad side so often. Djokovic usually trusts his backhand so much that he doesn't feel like it's worth it for him to get himself further out of position in order to hit a forehand. But it goes back to Novak's feeling in these heavier conditions where his backhand is not going to be as damaging no matter what. Where, okay, I got to find my heavyweight wing and I need to do, big time damage right away off the second return. So it was just weird to me. I've watched so much of Djokovic, obviously, and to suddenly see him hit a lot of runaround returns on the ad side was odd because to me it's like a Federer signature, and it's just not something Djokovic does. But he was doing it in this one. Was it effective? I would say mixed results. There were moments where it created something good for him. There were also a lot of second serve return misses from Novak, more than he would like, probably. Okay, this is a big one. Maybe I should have mentioned this outside of the notebook dump. It's pretty telling. It's pretty important. This was the worst Novak has ever done against a first serve in a Roland Garros match in his career. He won 21% of his first serve return points, and his worst previously, any match that he's played in his career at Roland Garros, you have a massive, massive sample size here. His worst previously was a quarterfinal against Milos Raonic, where he won 21.3% of his first serve points. So this now is the worst he's ever done against a first serve. And this underscores what I was saying about his defense being outmatched. Because to win first serve return points, it requires you survive the serve +1 firepower and that you're able to scramble your way back into the point against that immense and violent 1-2 attack. And of course, it extends past the 1-2 at times. But winning first serve points at the highest level is mainly about defense. That's how it starts. And the fact that Djokovic was only at 21% against Sinner's first serve, and obviously for us math geniuses out there, it means that Sinner himself won 79% of his first serve points. It says a lot, right? Next item. Jim Courier made an interesting point about Djokovic's vibes in this match as a competitor. The point overall was that he was a bit out of character. Not a lot of defiance, not a lot of feistiness. Looked relaxed, was smiling a lot. There's not much more to say on that, but I think we all know what Djokovic usually looks like when he's in that killer mode. And there's usually a level of almost constant irritation, not over the top, not out of control, but that constant irritation, laser focused, high expectations on each and every point. And when Courier said that, I was like, you know what? Yeah, it was kind of different from Djokovic mentally. That said, last item of the notebook dump. Amazing fighting spirit by Novak. He battled in that third set, which was really admirable. And I didn't realize this at the time, but Djokovic said a lot of it was because he was trying to give the crowd something. And the crowd was appreciating him a lot. I think there were a couple factors here. One, it's inarguable that the appreciation for Novak Djokovic and the great champion he is has gone up exponentially in recent years, because it's hard to appreciate something or someone fully until you realize that it's not going to last forever. That finish line in sight, I think, has definitely forced everybody to reckon with like what he's meant to the sport and what it's meant to watch him over the years. The other part of it is he was down 2-0. And it makes me chuckle because I think back to the U.S. Open final against Medvedev. He said the same thing in New York. He was like, I've never felt this crowd support in my life. And it touched him both times. And that was another match where there was definitely a ton of appreciation for him, and that was the biggest part of it. And then it just might have been aided a little bit by the fact that he was actually losing. And at that point, there might have even been some neutrals in the crowd who were getting behind him for that reason. But regardless, very, very nice to see. Means a lot to Novak, even in defeat, which he said after the match. Okay, that brings us to the preview of our Carlos Alcaraz versus Jannik Sinner final. Before we get to that, Monday Match Analysis is brought to you by 10S Tennis Supply, the go-to source for quality tennis equipment, court gear, and supplies. Whether you're coaching or running a club, 10S has the gear that keeps your sessions sharp. Ball hoppers, carts, scorekeepers, custom windscreens, ball machines, and their new tweener LED professional court lighting. Coaches and players who I've talked to swear by the quality and the durability of 10S products. And what you got to do is head over to 10s.com. That's the number 10-s.com. Order online or over the phone. Save with bulk order pricing, which is available for qualified customers, and contact 10S to learn more. So it'll be a 6th straight major title between Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner. And I've never felt like the gap between them and the rest of the field is larger. I've never felt that way to this extent like I do in this moment. Just 3 weeks ago, they were competing for the Rome title, and I did a preview on this YouTube channel and on this podcast feed. And I broke down the final afterwards, of course. So it doesn't make for the freshest of previews here, but I'm going to try to keep things fresh and go through some of the stuff that I think is most relevant, as always. I'm not going to go through all their meetings last year like I did in the Rome preview video, but Alcaraz won all 3 of them. Alcaraz leads the overall head-to-head 7-4. He is on a 4-match win streak against Jannik Sinner. What has worked for Carlos? I think the biggest thing that makes things difficult on Sinner is how Alcaraz is able to manipulate the ball on a regular basis to get it out of Sinner's strike zone and to change the rhythm by mixing up the speeds and the spins constantly. So he doesn't allow Sinner to play from his strike zone or dial in his timing. We know when Jannik is able to do those things, he becomes a machine. And every rally ball is 80 miles per hour and deep, and he never misses them. And you don't get anything to work with, and you get suffocated and you get rushed. Alcaraz's ability to constantly mix it up on a shot-by-shot basis does so much to take Sinner out of that zone. That's so crucial. The other thing that has served Alcaraz really well are in these big moments, he's come up with some fearless, proactive aggression, particularly at times relying on his forecourt skills. The 3rd set tiebreak in Beijing comes to mind, where he actually, forced some net approaches and made it work behind his attacking forehands. Had to make some difficult volleys, got it done. 1st set tiebreak in Rome, he had that big net approach at 6-5 in the 1st set tiebreak, where he came in on a ball that Sinner wasn't really expecting, and therefore he got a very manageable volley. On many of these big points, it is Alcaraz's offensive flair and his fearlessness that are taking it away from Sinner. It's not Jannik losing these points. It's Alcaraz winning them on his own terms. And he has that proactive streak to him that Sinner doesn't have quite as much. I think it's worth noting that if you look at the head-to-head, these matches have been close. Sinner has largely, again, other than Rome, he has not lost in straight sets. He has had his chances. So it's worth looking at what is happening in these really, really clutch situations or these high leverage situations. I think it's worth diving a little bit deeper into Rome. If I'm summarizing what happened in Rome, it goes as follows. Sinner did make some uncharacteristic mistakes at 5-6 in the first set. It was a return game where he should have broken serve. He shot himself in the foot a bit, went to a tiebreak. I talked about what Alcaraz did at the very end of that tiebreak. Non-ace winners in Rome were 15-6 in favor of Alcaraz, even though Sinner was hitting harder on average. Chalk that up to two things: point construction and movement. Maybe a little bit of volley skill, although he wasn't at the net all that often in Rome, despite the set point in the first. Drop shots, short angles. Some of it is that. I think some of it is court coverage. Sinner hitting harder on average, but producing less winners. What does that tell you? At any rate, it's very interesting. I feel the standout feature of Alcaraz's win in Rome was his clear defensive advantage because of how well he moves on this surface. Carlos turned points around way more often than Sinner did. That was reflected in the Tennis Insights steal score, which was 46% for Alcaraz, 92% in the second set, and 24% for Sinner. So let's play it forward now. Coming into this final, let's start with the things that I think Alcaraz should be focused on. I think dragging Sinner wide into his forehand side is absolutely crucial because I do feel there's some vulnerability there. Sinner's running forehand on hard court is maybe the best. It just doesn't look the same to me on clay. Not quite. I think often he feels the need to go pretty big when he's playing out of that corner. He feels the need to go big in order to wrestle back control because he gets insecure about his ability to recover back to the middle. And that leads to errors from that defensive position. Sometimes he goes safer cross court and just gets a little bit stuck in the corner. There were moments where Alcaraz went forehand cross court, forehand down the line combination, and it didn't look like Sinner was able to recover out of that corner and close into the open court as well as he needs to. And therefore, Alcaraz has a lot of real estate to hit that forehand down the line into. I like when Sinner slides into the ball open stance, but sometimes he doesn't hit it that way. Sometimes he leads with his left leg, kind of goes, pulls across his body with his left leg, and that's where he usually just hits big from that position. It ends up being a high-risk shot. I feel like Alcaraz can bleed some errors if he just stretches Sinner into his forehand as often as possible. And you contrast that with Alcaraz, who is always timing his slide perfectly, getting there on balance, playing with height back cross court or down the middle, and getting back towards the middle. That's what I've seen all clay court season from Alcaraz, is you put him in extreme positions on the court, and his movement is so good, he recovers out of them. And he doesn't feel the need to pull the trigger because he thinks that he's in trouble unless he completely damages his opponents from these extreme positions. He can actually play a safer ball, and he's trusting his legs to that extent. So I'm going to be very focused on how many points each player is able to win when dragged outside the sidelines. Second item, high and heavy into Sinner's backhand. Look for the runaround attack off of it. Benefits to that, benefits to playing high heavy into Sinner's backhand. You take away the energy of the ball coming in, you bother his contact point, and you put him in an uncomfortable, tough spot. His neutral cross-court backhand, if it's going to turn into an Alcaraz forehand runaround, where he can rip the inside in, that's trouble for Sinner. So he's kind of pressed on the cross court if Alcaraz is gonna cheat left. But then it's also tough to go down the line because now you're having to change direction off of that heavy shot. Difficult ball to time. Alcaraz almost wants Jannik to do that because he probably feels like he's going to get misses. One more thing about bothering the contact point. Sometimes it forces Sinner back. More often, the way Jannik is defending against this is he's playing on the rise. This is another area where clay courts versus hard courts, that matters because Sinner is not going to be quite as precise playing on the rise on a clay court where the bounce is a little bit less consistent. Something to note. Next thing is, and the last thing I want to hit on with Alcaraz is the slow court advantages that he benefits from. And this is yet another example. I think it's been interesting to see the one thing you might say about Alcaraz's win streak over Sinner, which has ballooned to 4 matches in a row, is that they haven't really played on a court that is above average in speed, which includes that Beijing hard court, which is on the slower side. But there are a ton of advantages for Alcaraz when the court slows down the ball. Not getting rushed as badly by Sinner's linear pace and depth, the bread and butter of Jannik's game. Having that extra 10% deadliness on the forehand that Alcaraz possesses over Sinner, which is unlocked even more by having the extra time. And I think you got to fold into that the fact that Alcaraz is more not natural as a net rusher, more natural certainly as a drop shotter. So in heavier conditions where it's more difficult to finish, Alcaraz is less affected by that. Now Jannik, he's got obviously the power to hit through heavy conditions, no doubt about it, but Alcaraz has even more options to penetrate on a slower playing clay court. Sinner. What does Sinner need to do better? Let's answer that question. He's got to move better. Rome was Jannik's first event back. He was playing his 6th match of the week. He was definitely sore. He was definitely feeling beat up. And the question is, has Sinner gotten himself to a point where he's going to be able to handle that running forehand better, that he's going to be able to turn points around on a regular basis? We'll see. What I'll add to that is Sinner's running forehand struggled in the semifinal at Roland Garros against Alcaraz last year as well. And I did not see anything in the Djokovic match that has me feeling super comfortable about that shot for Sinner. I think that the area where Novak probably had the most success, or at least the pattern that he had the most success in against Sinner, was when they were gunning forehand to forehand in that cross court. Sinner's got to serve better. Can Jannik have a great first serve day? It is so due to happen in this head-to-head. Last 4 meetings, Sinner has been at or below his first serve average for the year of 62%. Is this going to be the one where Jannik finally has an above-average serving day? He could really use it because on paper, that's an advantage he has over Carlos. Second return is the last thing here. He's got to get on to Alcaraz's kicked second serve somehow. Alcaraz won 59% of the second serve points in Rome. Jannik experimented with position. Sometimes he was close, sometimes he was back. He favored the close return position, but he was not connecting on the ball. He hit far too many weak returns from a close position, which is which is death because now you're out of position defensively, and Alcaraz could hurt Sinner on the +1. I don't mind Jannik missing some returns. I think especially early in the match, he needs to stand up and try to put the ball back on Alcaraz quickly and rush that +1. At the very least, on the ad side, bury that second serve return into Alcaraz's backhand corner. so that he can't change down the line when the ball is deep into his backhand quickly on the +1. So now he's forced to go cross court, and Sinner is on the ad side already, so he's pretty likely to get a forehand on that next ball. Now, if Sinner starts flushing those on-the-rise returns off the kicker, that's when Alcaraz needs to be willing to go hard at the body, hard at the forehand. And with that, I'm ready to get into my prediction. I want to lead off by saying Alcaraz's choices have been so dialed in throughout this entire clay season. I really like the decisions he's making on the court. Not something I've always been able to say about Carlos Alcaraz. But I think that's huge. I think that takes away a lot of the consistency edge for Sinner, which has the potential and at one point was so valuable for Jannik in this head-to-head. The fact that he was more disciplined, that he managed his percentages better, that was massive. Bad news for Sinner here. Alcaraz is managing his percentage tennis really well. He's able to mix it up and use his variety in a very, very repeatable way right now. Second thing, I am amazed by how well Alcaraz is playing out of the corners. I think it sounds weird to say, right? Because I just said that Sinner kind of had a movement advantage over Djokovic, and now I'm saying Alcaraz has a movement advantage over Sinner. And it's like, yeah, I do think there are sort of three different levels to it there. And I don't think anyone is anywhere near Alcaraz's level the way he's moving on a clay court right now. I think he is better than Sinner on the extremes of both offense and defense. And then there's the big final factor with Alcaraz. 11-1 in big finals. You trust him to show up and bring his A+ game in these sorts of matches. Once he gets some really good wins under his belt, dials in the conditions, has his confidence going, He always, throughout his career up to this point, he shows up in these matches. And if he's going to play his 10 out of 10 level, it's the best there is. My prediction is Alcaraz in 5. Because I do think Sinner can make a lot of the big improvements that I talked about. I do think he can move better than he did in Rome and in the semifinal in Paris last year. I do think he can serve and return better. If he does those things, I think he'll push Alcaraz hard, and I think this could be Jannik's Wimbledon 2007 moment when Nadal pushed Federer really hard on grass, and it was clear that the gap was very small and that he was going to potentially have a really good shot at coming away with the win next year. I think Sinner has a chance to make it that match. But I do think Alcaraz reigns supreme when it's all said and done and wins major number 5. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.